Greetings everyone, Brad here with Mild Mannered EDC, and today we're going to talk through a classic mild mannered review of the Kizer Wakulla. That's right, the Kizer Wakulla. Really interesting knife. I've had it in my collection for some time now. I like it a lot, but it's got some things where, you know, it's a quirky little knife. Well, it's not that little actually, but yeah. So I thought it would be an interesting review. It varies, you know, wildly on price, and we'll talk about that a little later. Depending on, you know, which site you go to or time of year, et cetera, et cetera. But just a really interesting offering from Kizer that I don't see a lot of people talking about, and I think could be of interest to all of you. So I hope you enjoy this this review. So let's go ahead and get started with a spec check and a size comparison, and then we can kind of get underway with our mild-mannered review. So the Kizer Wakulla comes in at a blade length of 3.51 inches, a slicey little blade thickness of 0.11, a handle thickness, a handle length of 4.42 inches, and a handle thickness of 0.42 inches, with an overall of tip to tail 7.93 inches, and an overall weight of 3.84 ounces. So there you go. So let's do a couple quick size comparisons here. We'll use our Bestech Swordfish. There you go. You can see how that kind of lines up. We'll use a Rat number 1. There you go. And let's use a Benchmade Bug Out here. So yeah, I mean, you know, it's when you're talking bug out, it's quite a bit bigger. Handle wise, not so much bigger, but definitely, you know, there you go, just to give you some comparisons there. All right, so let's go ahead and get underway with our classic review. And when we do a classic review, we talk blade, we talk action, we talk scales and hardware, and as well as carry. So let's go ahead and start with the blade. So the Kizer Wakulla. So the name Wakulla, and it actually is on the blade here. There you go, Wakulla, and as you can see, this is a Steve Jernigan's design. So the Wakulla, in my understanding, is the largest freshwater spring in the world. It's actually in the state of Florida, here in the United States, and I believe that's also where Steve Jernigan lives. So, and I think he has some other naming conventions around knives, kind of around things that inspired him in nature and things like that. So I actually kind of dig that name. I think that's a really cool name. I think it's interesting. I think the clean and sort of flowing, some of the flowing characteristics of this knife, I could see why he gravitated toward that towards that name. So there you go, the Kizer Wakulla. That's kind of the backstory there. Now the blade, as we were about to talk about, is a spear point blade, and you can see here, well, spear point or drop point, I guess you can go either way there. I guess that DP, they designated a drop point. There is a clip point version of this particular knife, and I'll put an image of that up on the screen as well. So it comes in both the drop point, spear point, and the clip point. It is a S35 VN steel. There you go, right down there at the bottom. A satin finish with a pretty darn aggressive flat grind. This is an extremely slicey knife, nice and thin behind the edge. One of Kizer's best, I think, at least of the Kizers I've owned. So yeah, really nice blade. It's got a really interesting shape, as we talked about. I mean, drop point, spear point, whatever. Has this interesting ramp, and we'll talk a little bit more about that both in action and ergos. It has a fuller, kind of on both sides, which again, I think sort of add nicely to the aesthetics of the knife. It's not a super deep fuller as fullers go, but, and I know some people don't like fullers, some people do, whatever. I like it. I think it adds an interesting design element to this particular knife. And yeah, this is just a really nicely done blade. It's pretty big. I mean, it's not a 3.51 inches. So it's not a tiny blade by any standards, but it is. But very attractive, really nice satin grind or satin finish on this flat grind. Now, this part I do think is kind of weird. So they have like this area, which, I guess could be a choil, but isn't. And then the blade starts here, and you can see they missed the choil just a little bit there to where that plunge kind of is. So, I mean, they could have, I'm not sure what this is compared to why that couldn't be here. But anyways, so there you go. That's a little bit of a gripe I have there. I also kind of, I really like the Wakulla. I like that it's called the Wakulla. I like that it's there. I don't know why they put the drop point in parentheses. I actually haven't seen that in many other knives where they differentiate the version sort of parenthetically next to the name. And we know a lot of knives come in different variations. So that's a little weird on the blade, but is what it is. So as you can see, there is a thumb stud that's way back here on the blade, and you can kind of see that, and we'll talk more about that when we do action. But yeah, it's because it kind of goes from there. But yeah, so there you go. I think overall a really nicely done blade by Kizer. I think it's really cool design by Mr. Jernigan, and I think it's if you like that kind of style of blade, and like I said, they grind it really well, so it's super sharp. In fact, I've cut myself a few times with this little knife. So there you go. So let's blade. Now let's talk action, and action's kind of an interesting part here. So let's show in the closed position. We've got sort of this weird front flipper, back flip, not back, I don't know how you want to, I mean, you can sort of do it this way. In fact, let me see if I can do that for you. Yeah, you can. It's a little less satisfying. It's much easier to just sort of put your index finger here and go, boom. Yeah, and it comes flying, it rockets right out of there. Yeah, I mean, it was pretty authoritative clack. Yeah. It also has this strange one-sided thumb stud, which I actually don't think is all that useful. You can, oops, see, there you go. And part of the reason is to actuate it, you've kind of got to have your hand up here, and then as you can see, it sort of meets in, see how it's doing that into the meat of my index finger? So it's like, you kind of have to make a weird, and maybe it's just my hand size, but you kind of have to get your hands moved, maybe give it a little flip of the wrist or whatever. So I'm not huge on the thumb stud. In fact, when I carry this knife, and I do carry it, I almost never use the thumb stud. I don't really like it. I definitely prefer that as the action. And like I said, yeah, it's got a great action. It's pretty fall shutty as they go. It's there you go. Yep. The detent, yeah, look at that. It's got a really nice action. The detent, however, isn't, there you go. One little shake and it came out. So the detent isn't fantastic from that standpoint. It's a little soft. But I also think they were maybe trying to dial it in, and we've talked about this in other videos, with sort of two different versions. And I've actually seen videos of this where you can open it like 10 different ways or something, with each finger opening it or something like that. So there's some kind of funny videos out there about that. But yeah, I mean, sometimes when you try to achieve that multiple opening ability, multiple styles of opening, you sort of lose, I think, a little bit with the detent, because you can't dial it in exactly to the type of opening you want to highlight. So that's definitely a complaint I have there. It is a liner lock, and you see there we got about a 40, maybe closer to 50% lockup there. Really nice. I like how you can see sort of the cutout of the lock bar there. Super easy to actuate, and like I said, you can see that action. I mean, yeah, and no blade play, no blade rock at all. So from all those standpoints, quite well done. So I think I'd give the action on this, especially just doing it from this particular way. This is definitely an above average action, and one that's good, and certainly high on the fidget factor. So if that's something you enjoy in your actions and your knives, so you get that kind of fun bounce there. Yeah, I mean, I definitely, yeah, it's a darn good action. So no complaints there. I wish the detent was maybe a bit firmer, but is what it is. So scales, hardware, let's talk. So this is pure titanium, right? Everything around it is milled to having a, and I also think this milling actually kind of goes along with that Wakulla, freshwater spring kind of theme that he's got going on there. So, and there's one case where I know some people really aren't huge fans of the, sorry about the big cut on my thumb, by the way, that's another story. But I know some people aren't always a huge fan of those older Kizer sort of floral pivots. I actually always kind of like them. They're a little bit of a dandy when it comes to the look and feel, but I kind of like them. I wish they kind of still did them, but neither here nor there. But yeah, so you just have this very sort of organic looking shape to the scales and to the handles, and I think they're really pretty, and they're really done well. I mean, you don't have a single sharp edge everywhere. Are they a little slippery? Yeah, you're for darn sure they are. It's just a slick piece of polished titanium there, and it's going to be slick. I mean, they try to add a little bit of this in. They give you some jimping up here and up onto the back of the blade, as we saw, but and a little bit down here. But, by and large, everything done really well. You can't see flow-through construction there. We got a couple backspacers over here. But yeah, I mean the scales I think are really well done. They're machined very well. I think it's actually quite beautiful as handle scales go, and I think it's sort of underrated in Kizer's lineup. This particular knife. So yeah, I think it's got a really pretty design and aesthetic, and I think the scales are done very well. Now, hardware is interesting. So we've got this relatively deep carry pocket clip, and I'll show you here on this. Yeah, I mean, so when that's in your pocket, it's all but disappeared, which is cool. The clip is an interesting, so you can see recessed screws, except they're actually on the inside. You can see them right there. So yeah, you're not switching this pocket clip over here because there is no option to do that. We can talk about that in carry, but yeah, sort of hidden screws kind of coming from the inside through the titanium out to here to lock this deep carry clip in place. And it is a nice clip. It's, like I said, milled titanium. It's very thin. It's kind of out of the way. I think it's an interesting execution. Not huge on, let me see if you can see that. Oops, sorry, as I bump everything. There you go. You can kind of see right here where it doesn't quite, that's a good view of it. It doesn't quite line up with the, I wish they'd have milled that better so that it sort of lined up perfectly with the, especially since you're only putting it on one side, would have lined up perfectly, with the scales there, and they didn't. So that's a little bit of a, just a little bit of a miss. It doesn't create a hot spot necessarily or a sharp edge or, kind of anything like that, but yeah, it's just a little bit of a miss, I feel like. So there you go. Those are sort of scales and hardware. Obviously a fairly large lanyard hole kind of plucked there, but it doesn't really bother me with the aesthetics. I prefer more of a hidden lanyard hole, but whatever. It is what it is on this knife. So it's not done. It's done pretty tastefully, I guess. So let's talk carry. So this knife carries pretty well. I mean, it's darn thin. It's, I think it's got this really interesting pocket clip that sort of keeps it, hanging in the pocket fairly straight. It's obviously only, right side tip up carry, but so sorry lefties on that one. But yeah, I mean, I think it carries pretty nicely for its size. Occasionally, I feel like I get a little bit of a hot spot off this back of this clip right here. Sometimes. I also feel like the way your hands kind of land as you're closing or opening the knife, you can sometimes feel it a little bit. I don't know. So the clip is sort of a good and a bad on this knife on some level. Like I said, on some level it's done really, really well. On another level it's like, but it works just fine. So I think carry on this knife is perfectly fine. It's got, decent ergos. I mean, it's pretty much just a straight handle with some mild contouring. So can't complain too much. Feels good in the hands. I don't have any problem there. And like I said, it slips in and out of jeans and other, slacks or shorts or whatever pretty easily. Good spring to the clip, etc. So So there you go. So this is my little take on the Kizer Wakulla. You know, price wise, this runs. It really runs the gamut. So when I checked this morning prior to doing this review, this was $188 on Blade HQ and $114 over on at Knife Center, and then kind of somewhere in between. I think I saw it on Amazon. So it really varies, and that's not to call out one retailer or the other. It's just to say this really varies. I have noticed, I got this particular one from Knife Center, and I have noticed that they tend to run pretty aggressive deals on this. At $188, I'm not sure. Yeah, that seems pretty steep for this knife, in my view. 114 feels like a really good deal for an all titanium S35 VN knife with a cool design and an interesting action and flipper style. I think for 114, that's kind of a bargain, in my view. So yeah, I mean, but again, sales always running on and off on this particular knife. Like I said, there is that clip point version if that's something you're more interested in, but there you go. That's my take on the Kizer Wakulla. I think it's an interesting knife, which is partly the reason I keep it around. It really doesn't look or behave like anything else that I've got in my collection. I think it's pretty from an aesthetic standpoint, and I like the inspiration from the deep, kind of its naming inspiration. So there you go. That's my take on the Kizer Wakulla. I hope this has been interesting to you. You've learned a little something about a knife that doesn't get as much play as it probably should. It's kind of an older knife, so I guess I understand that. But most importantly, stay safe out there, be mild-mannered to one another, and all the best.